All right, let's kick off. So welcome everyone to Voice Project's webinar on staying well and connected. Today we're going to hear about Darebin City Council's change journey to build organisational resilience, which they started before COVID hit, but was well tested during some very challenging times during the pandemic. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Langford. I'm the Director of Voice Projects. Joining me today are Charlie Zhang, who is a Senior Consultant at Voice Project, and Sue Wilkinson, who is the CEO of Darebin City Council. I hope you're all well. I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So on behalf of our speaker, Sue Wilkinson, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet, and in particular the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land encompassing Darebin City Council. We pay our respects to elders past and present. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll send around a link to the webinar and slides soon after the event. During the session, we will have a couple of opportunities for questions. Sue will be taking questions in the middle and at the end. If you're familiar with Zoom, or if you're not, mouse around a little bit and you will see that there is a Q&A button and a chat button. Use the Q&A button to send questions through, and Charlie Zhang will be moderating those, and he'll pass those on to Sue, and we'll address those in the middle and the end of the presentation. If you want to chat to fellow participants in the webinar, use the chat function. And also, if you have any technical issues, please send a chat directly to Peter Ha. That's H-A, his surname, and he'll try to deal with any technical issues that you might be facing. Now, before I hand over to Charlie and Sue, I'd like to give you a quick update of Voice Project. A little bit of background. If you don't know us, our purpose is improving workplaces by giving people a voice. Our services include employee surveys, 360 surveys, service quality surveys, focus groups, action planning. Our point of difference is real people and real change. And what we mean by that is our focus is exceptionally skilled and friendly staff. Our competitors focus on technology. We have great tech, but we put people first in the service that we deliver. And thanks to our exceptional staff, our research backgrounds, our awards programs, we have a proven history of helping our clients drive positive change. If you don't know our background, we grew out of a research program at Macquarie University, and since 2002 we've delivered surveys to more than 3.5 million employees and customers. A quick update of what's been happening at Voice. Yes, we're taking early steps returning back to our office, so some tentative early steps there. We had our second round. We did 2 rounds of customer satisfaction feedback of our clients, and we had excellent feedback. Thank you very much for everyone who took time to provide that feedback. We have gone through all those results, and there are some fantastic ideas there. We are building those into our plans for next year. I would like to proudly share a couple of the results, though. The overall satisfaction score was 97%, which we are very proud of, and thank you for that feedback. And if you know about Net Promoter Scores, our score was 77, which is exceptional. We've got some new surveys this year. We had a COVID-19 staff check-in survey, and we had over 150 organisations involved in that. We also have our revised and shortened engagement survey, which we rolled out a year or so ago, but clients have been taking that up, and it has been received very positively. We've also put a lot of work this year into enhancing our onboarding and exit surveys and the technology supporting those. And we also developed our volunteer survey this year. Obviously that's a niche survey for people in the not-for-profit areas, but if you're in that space, give us a yell if you're interested in that. We have built an enhanced online reporting tool. So if you haven't worked with us for 6 months or so, that will look quite different. So the new version's attractive, fully interactive exploration of the results, and it provides manager level permissions for results access and action planning. And we're also putting in place a new license-based pricing, which is going to enable our clients to have ongoing unlimited use of most of our surveys, as well as our online portal and that new enhanced reporting tool, which will give you the capability to run surveys yourself, or we can provide full assistance in the delivery and reporting of your surveys. So I won't bang on about us anymore. I will now hand over to Charlie Zhang, who is a senior consultant at Voice Projects, and he works with Sue and the team at Darebin Council. So I'll hand over to you now, Charlie, to introduce Sue. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Pete. So yeah, look, welcome everyone to today's webinar. So as Pete mentioned, my name is Charlie. I'm a senior consultant at Voice Project. I've had the good fortune to work with Darebin City Council on their engagement and culture survey, their onboarding survey, as well as their exit survey for this past year. It's been an enormous pleasure to be able to help them track and improve organizational performance and culture over time. Now, today it is my pleasure to introduce Sue Wilkinson. Sue is the Chief Executive Officer at Darebin City Council, which serves a diverse community of more than 160,000 people in Melbourne's north. Planner by background, Sue has significant senior leadership experience, having worked as the CEO of Colac Otway Shire in Victoria's West, and prior to that in executive roles at the City of Monash, Port Phillip, and also in Victorian State Government. Sue has a strong track record of delivery of high quality, coordinated services and complex public policy outcomes, and is highly regarded for her ability to engage with people and to build partnerships to deliver for the communities in which she has worked. Sue is well known for her open and approachable leadership style, and in 2017, her significant contribution to public service and the planning industry in Victoria was recognised when she was named as the winner of the prestigious Victorian Planning and Environmental Law Association's Paul Jeremy Award, which recognises outstanding contribution to public service. Sue, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to your presentation. The floor is yours, so go for it.
Thanks, Charlie and Peter, and thanks so much for the invitation to present today. It's great to be working with the Voice Project. So Peter's going to be my delightful assistant, and he's going to drive the PowerPoint. I have many skills, but PowerPoint is my nemesis, so I won't be doing that today. Hello out there in, across the country. I'm speaking to you from Melbourne. We've just come out of stage 4 lockdown and slowly emerging from what has been a pretty interesting year for most people. Just a little bit about Darebin before I kick off. We've got 1,300 staff that work across around 100 services, most of them traditional for local government, libraries, home carers, gardeners, road workers, office workers, all kinds of people. And you all know what it was like, I think, right across the country in the early days of responding to COVID. There is that word that gets used all the time, that's the unprecedented word. And I could talk for days, actually, about all the things that have happened this year, but I'll just focus on the work we've done to try to support the health and wellbeing of the staff through the pandemic. In Darebin, our community, as Charlie said, our community is 160,000 people, but it's also, it's a tale of two cities. We have a lot of very wealthy, well-off people, but a lot of very disadvantaged people. And across our community, the pandemic has actually highlighted even more strongly the difference between the people that were already struggling and who have really required a lot of support over the last 8 months, and those that were better set up to kind of last the 8 months of the pandemic, particularly in Melbourne when everything shut down. I think it's hard, I was just saying to Peter and Charlie, I think it's very difficult for people, if you weren't in Melbourne, to really understand how different Melbourne has been over the last 4 months. with curfews and 5-kilometre radiuses, only allowed to leave home for an hour a day, and work has been classified into essential and non-essential. You know, it's really had an impact on us as a service provider, but also the community at large. In terms of, you know, I kind of go back to March, and it feels like 1,000 years ago now, but one of the things that we wanted to do was to make sure that I've done some work in emergencies before, and we've treated the COVID pandemic as an emergency essentially. And I've done some work in bushfire communities. So the thing that we were very focused on early was to make sure that the health and wellbeing of our staff and community came first. So above everything else, we needed to make sure that we had this longitudinal approach, I guess, to making sure that people came out of the other side of this sort of unknown, because remember in March we really didn't know anything, but making sure that people felt supported and safe and healthy was the one thing we felt we could do in an environment where we really didn't know what we were doing. One of the first things we did was to set up an emergency management incident control team. It's a method that's used in sort of more normal emergencies that have a beginning and an end. A bushfire starts and then they put it out, and you have an incident control team where there's a kind of a hierarchy, a chain of command. Very lucky at Darebin to have extraordinary staff right across the board. And so we put one of our health protection coordinators, so a fellow, he's a very quiet fellow, a guy called Matt, and we put him in charge. And basically he was in charge of the organisation's response. So I reported to him because he looked at everything through a traditional health lens first, and everything else kind of fell from that. One of the other features that actually won't translate, I think, in 12 months was just how fast we were having to make decisions. So in the very early days of the pandemic, when we were getting, you know, hourly emails from state and federal government, and I'm sure this is familiar to others, telling us, you know, what the restrictions were. I remember a Friday night going to the opening of a festival, and on the Saturday morning having to make a decision to cancel the festival. So, you know, things were happening at, you know, sort of 1 o'clock in the morning. And so we put a lot of pressure on a lot of our staff very early on, and to make that work. And there were more questions than answered, but we worked really hard to make sure that we were communicating as much as we knew with staff and community. And that was something that I learned from my work in bushfires, that absence of communication creates fear. So we worked really hard to make sure that was one of our priorities. So once we kind of made it through the initial response, we had an incident controls team set up. We had moved people out of roles into a response activity. We then started to kind of focus on what that would mean for our staff, you know, specifically, but also our service provision. One of the things that we wanted to, as I said, was, you know, my real clear priority was making sure that we looked after the health and wellbeing of staff. And it didn't take too long to realise that a pandemic was very different, because there's no endpoint to a pandemic. So one of the things, and I think it actually took me a very long time to get my head around this, weeks and weeks, but you know, I think until there's some form of medical intervention, you know, there's a possibility that as a society we'll be moving in and out of response and recovery for quite some time. And that actually there were the changes that were occurring societally. So, you know, people having to work from home and people having to homeschool and all those kinds of things that were causing stress and anxiety. But that mindset shift that we may never ever return to life as we knew it until there's a vaccine was actually a really big thing that had an impact on staff's wellbeing, but it also then put under threat things like staff engagement and performance, and then in turn our service delivery. So, and that was all happening in a time when it was more important than ever. Our community really relied more than ever on our services, in some cases to even eat. So, we were declared a hotspot at one point, and so we had, large numbers of community that were relying on us to get them meals because they weren't allowed to leave their homes. And so we couldn't afford to have our service delivery go. And I also didn't want to lose all the work that we'd done to build strong engagement and to strengthen our culture. So to do that, we made a really dedicated effort to set up and strengthen. We already had work in place, but we really focused on setting up a program of work that was about giving life and giving voice to the health and wellbeing of staff. So I'll take you through that if you like. So the scope of the work that we saw, next slide please, Pete. The scope of the work that I gave to the team was that we wanted to make sure that everybody across the organisation, no matter your work background, no matter your language skills, no matter whether you're an office worker or an outdoor worker, that mental health and wellbeing was a valid part of the conversation for the organisation. So, and that went hand in hand with the changes that we had to make. By the end of March, we had hundreds of people working from home. I've now got nearly 600 people working from home. Overnight, we had to close pools and libraries and customer service centres and cancel productions and theatres and all those kinds of things. So I also potentially had hundreds of staff that were looking, and many of them the more vulnerable parts of my workforce, the casuals and the low paid staff, the school crossing supervisors, those sorts of people who were looking like they weren't going to have a job. And so one of the first things we did was to try to make staff feel secure, and I gave them an undertaking that I would do everything I could to keep them employed. Now, we're lucky at Darebin. I was in a position to be able to do that, and it took a lot of work, but that was one of the key, that kind of sense of certainty for people, because all around us, partners were being laid off, and we've had thousands of people become unemployed in Victoria through the pandemic, and a lot of those most vulnerable workers, the gig economy workers, the part-timers, the casuals, are the ones that were the hardest hit. And a good proportion of my staff fall into that category. So to actually give them the confidence that there would be a wage for as long as I could make that work was turned out to be, for me, it seemed like the right thing to do, but it turned out to be fundamental to people's health and well-being, just having that security. And but sort of in a more formal program sense, what we did was we really wanted to mainstream discussions about mental health and well-being, and making it okay for people to talk about not feeling okay. Because we took some advice early on from a trauma psychologist who essentially, we did a series of 5 webinars where all staff had access to this trauma psychologist. He's a fantastic fellow, and he essentially said, if you're not feeling some form of anxiety at the moment because of this unseen thing that we're to be scared of and all of the changes that are occurring, if you're not feeling some form of anxiety, then I'm actually a bit worried about you, because the more normal response is to feel anxious. And those moments actually had a huge impact on staff, because they knew they weren't alone and they knew that they were with everybody else. So we did a lot of that work. We made it safe for people to seek treatment. So, prior to the pandemic, people felt a bit shy about asking for help. I think that's normal, across all workforces, but we tried really hard to say to people, I'm seeking support, just normalising it and making it safe. We also did a lot of work to make sure that we really improved our compliance around health and well-being, and making sure that we were connected to people. I've talked a little bit about keeping people in jobs. That involved a huge package of redeploying staff. So we had at one point about 180 people redeployed, and we essentially created work to keep people working. So, I had lifesavers and librarians planting trees, and I had art centre coordinators washing windows of community buildings. And, not one person, as far as I know, complained about it. Some of them, came back and said, you know, the truth is I realise I want to be a librarian. I don't want to work in the parks department. But thanks very much for the opportunity, because they knew that was how we were keeping them in work, and they really valued that. So they were happy to give back. And then, of course, we did a lot of communication. So if we just go to the next slide, just a little bit more detail. We created an online health and wellbeing hub because one of the things that we realised was, even though we had a lot of programs existing at Darebin, they weren't in the one place. And so you actually had to go looking for all of this disparate information to put a whole picture together. So we spent a lot of time collating and putting everything we had together in this Stay Well, Stay Connected hub. And we nudge staff often. So we would in any communication I sent to staff, in any communication that we sent out, we really encourage people to access the resources, because it's a bit of a pick and mix. So we've built these programs that, if you need a bit of employee assistance support, or someone you live with does, you could do that. But, if you were just struggling with working at home because you were feeling a bit isolated, there were other, and it wasn't just our resources. We were, the team researched some of the best information available, because I don't know if people remember, but in sort of April, May, if I read one more article about mental health and working from home, I was going to go crazy. We tried to pick the best and the most reliable sources of information and push people to those things so that they didn't have to find that stuff themselves. But they could choose their own journey in a way. So they could ask for specific help and we would partner with them, or they could independently seek support. And so it was very much dependent on people's personal style and their own place. And then we spent a lot of time talking to people managers to make sure that we elevated the expectation that they would put health and wellbeing and checking in on staff and treat that as part of the job. So the getting stuff done became secondary to making sure that people felt supported by the organisation and they felt safe. For me, we talked a lot about safety and feeling that sense of feeling secure at Darebin, because you're working at home, you're trying to sort of look after kids with special needs or caring for people, or, I've got staff that live in this country but their entire families live overseas, and there's no prospect that they're going to get to go and see their families, for the foreseeable future. We have a lot of people that live alone, a multiplicity of circumstances. And for some people, their day, their connection to people was coming into the office and sitting with, a group of people that they like to work with on interesting stuff. Being stuck at home changed that dynamic. And so we wanted to normalise the idea that you do a health check, a welfare check, individually and in team environments. And if that was the only thing you did that day, it was still a good day. We did all the stuff around show bags and tricks and, posters and those kinds of things. But the more interesting stuff was the conversations, I think. So if we go on to the next slide, how am I going for time? We also did a bit of work to make sure that we increase the skill set. So making sure that people felt skilled enough to look out for people that were perhaps not doing well, but didn't have the confidence to ask for help. So we created training and videos. As I said, we created access to trauma psychologists who really helped us understand what the first question for staff should be, and to look for those. Because one of the things, as we all know, about working from home is I personally have really missed those non-verbal cues that you pick up when you're in a meeting. And it's fun to have tracksuit pants on and a work shirt and tracksuit pants. That's the good side of it. But the bad side of it is you really have to dig a bit deeper to understand. It might not be the first question, it might be the second question or the third question, but you've got to take time. And the other thing about this forum is that people can kind of hide behind turning off their mic, turning off their video, or you get lost in a big group where you can see everybody, but there's a place to hide that's different when you're in the room. And so we wanted to make sure that people leaders were really, supported in understanding what to look for. The other thing we did was, provide stuff around psychological first aid, and making sure that people understood that if they did see that there was a problem, understanding what they then could do, because they're not counsellors, they're not, my staff are not qualified mental health professionals, but it's understanding about how they then might go and get some help to provide help to someone else. As I said, one of the big things, and I hope this is one of the lasting legacies, is actually we tried to make it safe for people to say that they weren't okay and to get help. So we've seen an increase in our access to the employee assistance program. Interestingly, one of the things that we also did was made our employee assistance program available to our local businesses and to their staff, because very early on we were hearing from our traders that mental health was a really big issue for them as well. And a number of very small businesses don't have employee assistance programs. So we actually opened up that confidential service. And so just knowing that was there actually helped people, and they've been incredible. We also broadened and put a lot more meat on the bones of our contact officer network, and created wellbeing champions, so that you didn't have to necessarily talk to your supervisor. You could talk to someone independent but a part of the organisation. So they were sharing your experience, but they weren't necessarily connected to your job. And so we tried to separate this idea that your job success relied on your health. Because the truth is, over the last 7 months, every single member of my staff has had a bad day or a bad week. And it's not got to do with whether they're doing a good job. That wasn't relevant. Even if they're doing an amazing job, we've all had days when we've struggled, and our resilience, the shell of resilience, is not as thick as it would be normally. So, and then, as I said, some stuff around compliance. So making sure that we were, using the compliance stuff to also give us clues. Then what did we do? And then if I move on to the kind of the cool, the kind of more sexy stuff, we did a lot of communication. So we tried to work very hard. I know everybody tried Zoom drinks on a Friday night, and then we all got a bit bored with it because it still felt like a meeting. Right across Australia, I did it too. But what we tried to do was actually use our online forums to create groups that were moderated by staff based on, interest groups. So very early on, one of the things that became clear was a number of the parents in our workforce were really struggling with homeschooling. And then in June, when we had about 3 weeks where the kids all went back to school, and then 3 weeks later they all got pulled back home again, there were some anxieties about kids going to school. We all thought, I don't have kids here. So, I thought, parents will just be rapt that their kids are going back to school. When in fact, the truth was, for a number of parents, they were worried about how the kids would go. And that created an anxiety that I couldn't personally relate to. So we created these little groups where people just talk to each other, and they've gone a bit crazy now. There's groups for everything, and little, so that it's less about COVID and more about communities of interest across the organisation. But, Darebin tracks, you'd think that would be about walking tracks. It's actually a group that talks about music they like. And, and so people have actually gotten to know each other in a way that they wouldn't have, because, we used to stick to teams. We've now got this larger community that people have access to, and finding the thing that they're interested in has given them a connection. So someone who works in the parks department may never have met a maternal and child health nurse before, but they both have a similar, complexity about getting their preppy back to school in November for the first time this year. And so that's been a really lovely thing. And I don't actually know what happens in those groups. We don't need to know. It was just one of the things that we did. As I've said, if we go to the next slide, one of the kind of pieces I'm most proud of is this redeployment program. And we talked about it a lot with staff. So, and you can see there Paige, who was a swimming instructor and then got redeployed into the communications team. Actually, we uncovered all this incredible talent of people who actually had skills and they weren't working in their skilled, in their professional area. And Paige is one of those. Paige put up her hand. She was a casual swimming instructor at RLC. She ended up in the comms team because what we did was we created the opportunity for people to put up their hands for jobs. And she said, I wouldn't mind working in the comms team. Turns out that's where her background is. Turns out she's been the greatest thing ever to go in our comms team. And if we can, we're going to try and find a way for her to, move into that direction if that's something she wanted. So we've been able to uncover talent, but we've also been able to move staff around because some of our services were significantly impacted by increased demand. Particularly our community support areas. So we're able to move staff into there to sort of help bolster that work, but also to do things that were aligned with our values. So, over the first 3 months of redeployment, the team, the parks team together with the redeployees planted more than 50,000 trees and plants. So right across our public areas. We got to a point where we couldn't actually get any more trees. We had more staff than we had trees. So that's been hugely successful and the staff have welcomed the opportunity. In terms of communication, we were really, it was very structured. So it was casual in style, but very, very structured. And you can see some of that element there that was linked to our values. The values are down the bottom. And the Stay Well, Stay Connected, they're all integrated, but quite separate. So you could click or, if you were part of the redeployment program, you could go into that area. There were a set of resources for you. If you were affected by the way we were changing the work, all these people working from home, all these people working in jobs that aren't their jobs, if you're interested, you could go there. And then the next slide, in terms of communication platforms, I honestly believe I don't think I did much else but communicate over the last 7 months. It was just constant. We created a CEO kind of coronavirus newsletter and there were days when it went out twice because things were changing so quickly. And we actually did a Voice Project check-in survey in, I think it was about May. And one of the pieces of feedback we got from that check-in survey was that they were really, staff were really responding strongly to the amount of communication and in fact asked for more, which I found mind-blowing. I couldn't believe that they wanted to hear from us more, but they wanted even more information. And there was a lot of authenticity in that communications. It wasn't polished. It was very much in my voice. And if I didn't know, I would tell people I didn't know. I never promised things, and because there were lots of times when we weren't sure when we were going to be able to come back, and we weren't sure if the library was going to have to close on. There's a lot of rumours and announcements happening, and so we were always honest to say to people, yeah, we're not really sure, but we'll find out. That is the answer today. But to be honest, and sometimes we would provide information and then the state would release new advice and we'd have to go back and say, that thing that we told you yesterday about you don't have to wear masks in your vehicles, turns out you do. So we know that sucks a bit, but it's just the way it goes. Just constant communication. And we told stories. So the next slide, this is a bloke called Rob. He's a legend. He's one of our technical crew in the arts and entertainment sector, so like an events technician, lighting technician. We actually lent him to one of our not-for-profit organisations that was really struggling. Because we had to close the Arts Centre, we didn't need all of our tech staff. Rob, and I'm actually a bit worried he's not going to come back, to be honest, just between all of us. But we lent him to the Inner North Community Foundation to help them with their community support work. We paid his wage, but it bolstered the effort there, and he has loved it, absolutely loved it. So we told those stories, so that no one across the organisation, if you were home, you never felt isolated from the organisation. And then the other thing we did was really try to recognise great work. So we do a lot of storytelling at Darebin, and we created these things called champion moments. And whenever we heard a story about someone doing an incredible, and I mean, there were more incredible jobs than we had screen space, but we just tried to pull out people that were doing amazing, amazing work and just say thank you publicly in these champion moments. So that gives you a bit of a picture. It's probably worth just having a bit of a, just sharing a few reflections. COVID, you know, as a leader of an organisation and someone with, you know, quite a bit of leadership experience, one of the things that I've said to the organisation is if people are telling you that they know what they're doing, don't believe them, because no one has dealt with this before. And so, you know, there's a few lessons. One is you can't do this stuff alone, and we have helped each other. And so the culture of the organisation, the work that we've done prior to this year in 2018 and 2019, including using the data that we've gotten through our engagement surveys with staff, have helped us create. We're at the beginning of a culture change journey. We decided on our values, organisational values as an organisation. And we'd started the year by saying, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to, you know, do a piece of work that says what do these values mean for us in team environments. We didn't really get a chance to do this. We actually just had to jump in and go, these are our values. You know what to do. Go and do it. And I trust my staff implicitly. They know their services, and they know their parts of the community better than I ever could. And so I just empowered them to make the decisions that they needed to do and tried to stay out of the way and to clear barriers for them. And the culture stuff really came into the fore. So what we found was that our values, we were able to point to experiences and champion moments that aligned with our values and say, that's an example of, you know, delivering on our promises. So remember, we said we valued that. Here's an example. So we always kind of came back to this North Point. The second reflection I would say is that speed definitely trumps perfection, although I hate to use the word trump. We were really prepared to make mistakes, and we did, but we tried very hard to make sure that we heard people early on, and we had a crack at stuff, and if it wasn't working, we turned it off and we were open and honest about it, because things changed so quickly and it took no time at all for little cohorts of staff to feel isolated. We wanted to intervene really, really quickly. And probably my biggest leadership reflection is the really big importance of being overt about the fact that you're putting your people first, and don't apologise for it. And for me, some people, I think probably if a councillor heard me say that, they'd think that it meant that I was putting the community second, but actually that's inherent in putting your people first means you're putting your community first. Because if my staff don't feel supported and well and healthy and connected to the organisation, they're not going to support their community and run their services well. So I've just said you guys are my only priority right now. And, you know, that's that thing about being authentic and trying to be kind, trying not to judge people because you don't know what's going on at their home, you know, those sorts of things. And, as we come out of it, it sort of feels like we've all been in a bit of a weird kind of social isolated hibernation. Re-entering is a challenge in and of itself. So, you know, that's the next piece of work. But it's probably a good time to stop and take questions if there are any, Peter.
Yes, so thank you so much for that, Sue. There were quite a few questions, so I might just pick out a couple of ones that people were very interested in. So there was one around the care for employees. So you described quite a few methods for providing care and well-being. How were all these important additional resources balanced with people's workload?
Yeah, so workload has been a kind of enduring challenge for us. But the truth is, Charlie, it was an enduring challenge for us before the pandemic. What we tried, so if I think about my third level leaders, you know, they're under a lot of pressure. They were working a lot of hours, particularly in the early days as we were trying to close down services and find work for people and, you know, build, it's that old analogy about build the plane at the same time as you're trying to learn to fly it. There was a lot of that going on in the early days. And what I did, one of the specific interventions I did was say to my management team, there are a series of core functions that they have to do every year. You know, you have to do monthly reporting. You have to, you know, performance reviews, for example. We just took all of that away. So, you know, one day I put them in a virtual room and said to them formally, performance reviews now are half an hour cup of coffee. I'm working on the assumption that every single person in this organisation should get a pay rise. And so we're just going to take that off the table. I want you to use this year's performance review to say thank you and to check in. And so that saved them weeks of work, weeks and weeks and weeks of work. And it was kind of an artificial need for that work anyway this year. And, you know, we stopped the stuff that didn't matter, the monthly reporting and all of those kinds of things. You know, I might live to regret that. I might think, you know, in March next year, I might think, gee, I wish I knew what was going on in March last year. But we have just been trying to keep the lights on. You know, the increase in demand for meals and support for our older community and our cold and Aboriginal community has been unprecedented. And so that was what we decided was important, not the kind of the stuff that keeps an organisation together but doesn't add value. So you had to prioritise, and we just gave people permission to stop doing things. Yeah, but it's imperfect.
Cool. That's great. There's another question from Lauren. So what were the differences between the first and the second lockdown from the council's perspective? So I guess in relation to how you handled the situation, were there any differences in the way you approached it?
Yeah, a lot of it was, you know, sort of mental, to be honest, Charlie. We had this, so closing down services the first time was really challenging for all of us who've worked in local government for a really long time, because we felt initially like we were turning our back on the community, and we really struggled with it, but we had to. And then we closed them, and that was kind of fine. We were all very desperate to open them. Opening services again turned out to be harder than closing them. So, you know, sometimes the Premier on a Sunday would say, and tomorrow pools can open, and we'd say, okay, that's good, but my workforce is not there. And so that was really challenging. But as great as those sort of 3 or 4 weeks, I'm probably reinventing history, it might have been longer, but the whole thing's a bit of a blur. But whilst that kind of period where we went into kind of, it was wonderful, and we all went out and had a drink and we went to restaurants and stuff, it was harder to go into stage 4, because what happened was when we went back into lockdown, it was far more restrictive than it had been. And it kind of created a second wave of concern. And that was when staff started to really ask questions like, will we ever be coming back to this workplace? Has this changed forever? So it created the opportunity for other conversations, but it was super, super challenging. It knocked everyone around, there's no doubt.
Yeah, cool. All right, so there was another question from Craig, which so he was interested in the insights around challenges and the challenges specifically to workforce culture. And so I believe you're going to cover that in the second segment. So on that note, I might just move to the second part of the presentation.
Yeah, sure. So probably, and I've already touched on this a little bit, but one of the things, so I started work at Darebin in 2017, and we had a set of organisational values, but it became very clear pretty quickly that no one knew what they were. And so if you don't know what the values are, what's the point in having them? Because they should actually be your north point, like your go-to, I believe. And so we did a lot of work across the organisation. It was very much a bottom-up, because for me it doesn't matter what the values are as long as the organisation values the values. And so we did a huge piece of work where everyone across the organisation had a voice in what our values should be, and working with them to understand the benefit of values in terms of strengthening the culture. So I've always said I want people to feel proud to work at Darebin. I don't want them to, at the barbecue or at the pub say, I work for a council. I want them to feel like they can shout it from the rooftops. And that's the culture. If you feel proud of where you work, then you can do anything, right? And so the values are meant to support that. As I said, just prior to the pandemic, so in February, we were leading a whole lot of local conversations with teams to say to them, we've decided on these values, make a difference, we are accountable, we are creative, etc. What do they mean for each of them? What do they mean for the animal management team? What do they mean for the customer service team? What does we make a difference mean to my customer service team? And it might be slightly different to what does we make a difference mean to our animal management team. The idea was that teams would develop a set of behaviours to match the values, and then they would hold each other accountable. We will go back to that work now. Hopefully we're through the worst of the pandemic, but the amazing thing from lockdown and the last 8 months is that we have been able to do that in real life. And so it's not a theoretical question about what could we do differently. You get to pick all the great things and say, well, wouldn't it be good if we made a difference, like this example of Paige, who was prepared to go and be redeployed from a pool into a communications team. What's our version of that? And so we will do that going forward. And then the other thing is making sure that our values, unfortunately at Darebin, what we hadn't done previously is have our values and behaviours measured in terms of the way we recruit people, our performance management and all of our sort of systems. So we weren't actually saying, we were saying to people, we want you to live these values, but we weren't actually rewarding that. And then, the complexity is also around how we do that in a flexible way that matches a mix of working styles that we're going to keep, I think. I don't know that we will ever go back to having hundreds of people in the office ever again. So how do we have the values flex so that, and the culture of the organisation flex to match the new normal? And, one of the things that's at risk of that, obviously, is that sense of community, that sense of connection, and that idea that, you put a group of people in a room and amazing things come from that. How do you capture that and not lose that through this work? So one of the big things that we've done more recently is reward and recognition. So we've developed a program. Reward and recognition is really, it's the kind of cornerstone of every organisation. Taking the time to say thanks and celebrating great stuff should really be just basic. We've recast our whole reward and recognition program and created a program that we call Appreciate Great. And it's completely aligned to our values. So what we're doing is, and it comes from work that our staff survey told us, which is they understand the vision, they understand the job, they feel connected. They complained about, policies and processes, of course, but they also said that they didn't feel recognised. And it's the easiest thing in the world to say thank you to someone. And so what we want to do is we want to normalise that and make that just part of it. So I never want to have a staff survey again tell me that people don't feel like they're recognised for the work that they do. Like, it's crazy. So we've launched this new Appreciate Great. And it's a whole lot of stuff. It's local. So what we're trying to do is create a culture of thanks in the organisation. So that, Charlie, if I see you do something, wonderful, like pick up my phone because, I was talking to someone else, then I'm going to take the time to say thanks. That's basic. But then, and then they sort of escalate up to extraordinary impact, but they're all centred on our values. So our awards, any award that we do will be linked to one of the values, making a difference, etc. And then also some more localised. So we're doing it at a team level, like sort of a one-on-one level, a team level, a divisional level, and an organisational level. And it's peer reviewed. So peers determining, the best of the best. And the response has been extraordinary, just extraordinary. People have loved it. So if you think that a reward and recognition program, you're going to get to it, I must make sure that happens. I can't tell you how, for me, it was one of those things that we should have always had and been doing better, but there was always another priority, responding to a pandemic. This year, launching that program has been one of the big, most positive things in terms of the staff response. They just have loved it. And one of the reasons why I like Appreciate Great is I think it's important to say thank you, but one of the things I'm most scared of in terms of the organisation's culture is losing that sense of connection, that people connection. I'm a raging extrovert, so it's something I would be scared of, but great things come from working in the same environment, really incredible things. And team, culture is about team. And if you don't feel connected to a team, then you could erode the work that we've done around creating this culture of thanks, just, one sort of moment at a time. And so part of Appreciate Great is about trying to create that connection and recognise, creating that sense that we are a community, even if we're all over, living in all kinds of places. And yeah, it's been quite a ride, but I think we're on the right path. I think we've come out the other side. I think all of the work that we've done, including this year, has helped us really come out the other side with a pretty strong culture. And I'm actually hoping, Charlie, that, the next time we do the survey, we'll see a kind of a big jump in how connected people feel to the organisation because they've lived it in the most difficult of circumstances. In a weird way, I think the potential is for us to come out of this more connected than we were when we went in. So yeah,
that's great.
Sorry,
so can I just stop you very briefly? No, that's okay. So just in relation to the Appreciate Great, before we move on, I'm aware that the process has only recently been introduced. So Nicola had a question around whether you can explain the peer review process for Appreciate Great in a bit more detail. Yeah.
So the idea is that so we've got a committee. And it's not just sort of me making a decision about who did the best job. Staff, so staff will be on that committee, and they can help contribute to, the sort of annual awards. But there will be, if this is successful, there will be Appreciate Great moments happening right across the organisation every single day that I don't know about. Where teams take the time to say, I bought you a cup of coffee because I can see how hard you're working, or I cooked some muffins last night and I brought them in because I care about you all. Those kinds of things. That's those little micro moments that matter. One of the things that we tried to do was make it clear to people that I couldn't be responsible for their happiness at work alone. You couldn't hold me accountable because, you know, there's 1,300 people work there. I only know about 100 names, right? So everybody else, they need to take charge of how they sit in their workplace. And what we do is provide the systems and the structures for that to be a great experience. Yeah, so that's what I mean by it's peer determined.
All right, we might have to wrap up soon. So Sue, you might want to go through the final slide. And yeah, time for one more question. Okay, so there was a question from Rizika around whether you embed the values. So when you were talking about the new values, were they embedded in other management systems?
Yeah, so they're, you know, and this is a bit of a work in progress because we got sidetracked with COVID, but they're in, this is a photo of all of my champions. These are the people that led the work with the staff to determine the values. In a bit of a naughty photo, they're not being very serious there, but they're all champions. Yeah, so it's through, so it's the kind of basic stuff like performance management. You know, everyone's KPIs will be set according to the values, but it's in the way we chair meetings. It's in the way we run our agendas. We reflect back on our practices based on the values. So, you know, because so for me, the values work when you're faced with a not black and white question, and the values help guide the right answer in the moment. And so every single person in my organisation makes 100 decisions a day independently, that the values are the north point. So that's how they'll become embedded into management practice. But yeah, so the way we manage meetings, the way that we celebrate. So all of our communications are centred around the values so that they're just everywhere. Yeah. I hope that answers.
Great. Yeah, that's great. So thank you so much for your time today, Sue. That was great. We're coming up to the end of the session, so I might just pass over to Pete for some final words.
Okay.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, especially Sue. That was an amazing story. Great insight, very authentic delivery in terms of the experience that you, your team, all of the council has had during some very challenging times this year. So look, thank you tremendously for your time in putting this together, and thank you for your support to the community in Darebin. It was one of the areas that was hit the hardest. So yeah, you've done an amazing job. Thank you to everyone who joined today. I hope you found value in the content. As I said before, we'll send around copies of or link to the copies of the slides and a recording of this session soon afterwards. And there will also be a feedback survey in your browser following this, so we value your feedback on how we can continue to deliver great webinars for you in the future. So that's all. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic time. Stay well.